As the speakers come to the stage, there's several topics that are going to be touched on today. Dr. Finger, certainly not a stranger to anyone here, but Dr. Finger this year is going to be the moderator of the panel. We're going to talk about a number of topics, including objective lameness evaluation and racehorses, evaluating the practical applications and the complexity of positives. Dr. Tobin's going to touch on that. And then also some updates on the environmental exposure issues that we continue to deal with. And then a late addition, very happy to have brought and will be on Zoom, the USDA reporting on the water sampling that we've been doing for the past couple of years with a long delay due to the federal shutdown. But Dr. Finger now has a good report to bring to us. So. Move one. Yes. Yes. Lauren will give a thumbs up and see if they're on.
Is Dr. Smalling now? Okay. All right, so we lined up for everybody, and some of you that had water tests done, you should have your results, and so have questions. We have the U.S. Geological Survey. Hang on. I just had to make sure we all saw Ken. We have the U.S. Geological Survey. Chief Scientist is going to be joining us, but I think she's not on yet. Okay, so when she comes on, we're going to interrupt. But I just want to point out that our research group, which is headed up by myself and Dr. Tobin, when we come across a problem in horse racing, then we kind of reach out to basically the experts. It's certainly, at least in this country, if not the world, to join us in studies. And so we've done a number of studies where we've been able to pull in basically the world or US experts. And when we look at the risk of water contributing to positive tests in horses, we reached out to the premier hydrology or water study group in the country, and that's headed up by Dr. Paul Bradley and Kelly Smalling at the United States Geological Survey. The good part is we got their expertise. They also basically covered all of the expenses except just the materials. So for a cost of $950, any jurisdiction that wanted their water tests could get that done. And that's compare that to, you know, horse drug testing, where like what's a split going for these days? $2,000. So that's a single sample, single test, single drug, checking a split, just so that you know what a bargain this $950 was. And then just another comment is getting the results back. I've also found out that we still have some missing data sets. We've got a couple of racetracks where the samples were never sent back. So we're going to try to clean up all those loose ends now that we're here.
Back.
Okay. Okay. She's on. Okay, super. So the project was headed up at the United States Geological Survey by Dr. Kelly Smalling, and I'm going to put her on, I think. Can you go ahead and put her on? Oh, hang on. I'm going to go on to the next. I have a couple additional slides real quick. So we have, just to point out where the sample locations are, these are the collaborating groups that we had. If you're on that list in green and you don't have your results, then you can talk to me and hopefully I've got them for you. And so we've asked Dr. Smalling to join us and just give us the preliminary results. And if you don't have your results, and you should, you can find me afterwards and I will provide those to you. With that, I'm going to give you Dr. Smalling from the United States Geological Survey.
Hey everyone. Hey Claire. Do I have the option to share my screen?
I believe you can share your screen now.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right. Oh boy. There we go. Let me share that. That in presentation mode. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So first of all, thank you all so much for allowing us to come and join you all virtually, participate in this panel. I came in on kind of the end of Clara's talk, so she's given you some brief overview into the study that we conducted. So I first wanted to kind of provide you with a little bit of information about myself and Paul Bradley, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, and kind of our research and what led us to Clara and Thomas, or Clara and Thomas to us, and us to your group. So first of all, just a little background on the USGS and our research. So a lot of the work that I'm going to be funding or talking about today, a big chunk of it not only was funded by Clara and Thomas, but was also funded through the USGS Environmental Health Program. So Paul and I lead what we call the Water Infrastructure Integrated Science Team. It's kind of a mouthful, but the point is our emphasis is on what we call the human impacted water cycle. So our project is really focused on understanding exposures to mixtures of both natural and man-made contaminants in both drinking water and the environment. So kind of two pieces. So for decades, the USGS has been assessing either single contaminant or small contaminant mixtures in the environment, so in surface waters and groundwaters. But in 2012, the USGS and EPA collaborated in order to kind of combine our expertises and our capabilities and really do a detailed assessment of basically as many chemicals as we possibly could in surface water sites across the country. The map kind of gives you an idea of the breadth of our sites. Some of these sites are actually drinking water resources, so they're rivers or reservoirs that are used as drinking water. And again, we tried to analyze as many contaminants as possible. So what does that mean? So by pooling our resources and our capabilities, we were able to analyze every sample for 719 unique compounds. That sounds like a ton. It is. It's also very expensive, which is why we kind of only did this once. But the results of those were quite interesting. So out of all of the sites and out of the 719 contaminants that we looked at, over 50% were pesticides and pharmaceuticals. These compounds are what we call, they're designed to be bioactive. So they're designed to elicit some sort of positive or negative effect. And then in total, we detected over 400 compounds at least once in our surface waters across the US. And of those, over 55% of those were pesticides or pharmaceuticals. And the top 10 compounds that we detected, again, were kind of those bioactive compounds. And what's really interesting here, you don't have to read the names on the top, but what we're trying to show you is kind of the complexity of the chemical mixtures in our nation's surface waters. So each one of these red lines represents an individual chemical. So the more the red, the more chemicals. We do have some sites with less chemicals, but as you can see, contaminants, at least a couple of contaminants were prevalent across all the sites that we sampled. So this led us to kind of some more focused studies, these smaller, what we call regional stream assessments that were conducted by our National Water Quality Program. And based on the results of our chemical mixture study, a lot of these emphasis was on pesticides and pharmaceuticals. So between 2014 and 2017, the USGS sampled over 300 small streams across 4 regional urban gradients in the Pacific Northwest, California, the Northeast, and the Southeast. So each sample, we're going to just focus on pharmaceuticals here. Each sample was analyzed for over 100 different pharmaceuticals, all human use pharmaceuticals. And then what we observed were complex mixtures of pharmaceuticals in greater than 90% of our streams. And what the map on this slide shows is it's giving you an idea of kind of the breadth of the pharmaceutical concentrations as well as detections. So the larger, the darker the circle, so red and orange, indicates higher concentrations. And then the larger the circle indicates more compounds. So you can see here in the Southeast, we see pretty high concentrations of pharmaceuticals in our small streams. Up in the Northeast, we see a lot of pharmaceuticals being detected in some of these smaller streams. And we see kind of a breadth of concentration and detection throughout the Western US. So why do we see so many compounds in our surface waters? Well, if you look at kind of chemical production in the US and globally, there are, depending on the metric you look at, there's between 85,000 and greater than 100 million different substances that are actually produced. And many of these compounds make it into our surface waters, and many of these surface waters are used as drinking water complexity. From a drinking water perspective, the Safe Drinking Water Act for public supply regulates about 90 compounds. So what this means is that kind of that environmental complexity from our chemical mixtures study, which is represented from that nicely from that heat map, it continues to challenge drinking water treatment technology, because drinking water treatment technology is really not designed to remove a lot of these man-made chemicals. And as you all probably know, in the US, there are 3 distinct distribution pipelines for drinking water, and they can all be a route of exposure to contaminant mixtures. So we have public supply, which is regulated by the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act for about 90 chemicals, and it's all monitored prior to distribution. So as a person on public supply, you can get information on your drinking water quality. Bottled water, it is regulated by FDA. It's regulated as a foodstuff. And again, you can get consumer reports that'll tell you what kind of contaminants are in the bottled water that are regulated. And lastly, they're private wells. Private wells are not regulated by the EPA, and they're rarely monitored, which means that most people on private wells really don't have an idea of their drinking water quality. And what we know based on a lot of the work that I just discussed, that complex mixtures of contaminants are present in our drinking water sources. And again, many of these contaminants are present in your tap water because they make it through the treatment process, because the treatment process isn't designed to remove them 100%. So in our country, kind of why this is more of why the USGS is really focused on drinking water. We are not a public health agency, we're a science agency, but we can provide information on exposure. So the idea is, because in the US, we're grappling with kind of all these different drinking water quality concerns like aging infrastructure. We see incidences of lead in drinking water supplies. We've got water quality failures. We see algal blooms in our drinking water resources. And then PFAS, pharmaceuticals, pesticides, they're all showing up in our drinking water supplies. So these concerns really led public health agencies to come to the USGS and say, hey, we need more information on contaminant exposures at that point of use. So at the tap, where that exposure actually happens. And we need that information using kind of this more expanded analytical toolbox. So get away from the 90 regulated chemicals and tell us what you think is in our drinking water. And so to do this, we've really had to lean into community partnerships. So we work with communities. We try to answer the community questions. So they're really community-based and community-led. And the goal is to support individuals, state agencies, nonprofits, tribes, other federal agencies to help people understand what drinking water exposure looks like in their community. So from an analytical perspective, we don't analyze over 700 chemicals, but we're close. We've been doing this for quite some time, and this is kind of our analytical toolbox. We have quite a few priority chemicals. We have natural inorganic chemicals like arsenic and uranium. We look at microorganisms. We've included pharmaceuticals in most of the samples that we've collected since we started. So we have a really good idea about what chemicals are showing up in our nation's drinking water. And so this kind of is showing a shift. We've spent a lot of time, we've been doing this work for decades. We spent a lot of time focused on surface waters, really trying to understand that environmental complexity. Once we kind of got an idea that there are a lot of different chemicals in our, potentially in our drinking water resources, we've really kind of shifted focus on drinking water, focus specifically on exposure at the tap. So our project it's national in scope. We kind of go where the community needs are, but it's conducted kind of modularly across these spatially specific pilots. It's pretty expensive to kind of do our entire toolbox. So we can only do between 30 and 60 sites a year. So we've been working this up slowly, but the goal is to kind of roll up all this stuff, all this information to answer national questions, as well as to design studies like the one I'm going to talk about with Clara and Thomas to answer something on a national scale that may be slightly out of the box for us. So pharmaceuticals are something that is of interest to Clara, Thomas, and others with racehorses. And so based on kind of the work that we've been doing for the last 10 years in surface water, kind of initiated that conversation with Clara and Thomas to figure out how we could assess pharmaceuticals in drinking water at racetracks across the country. So first of all, I think we took all of the pharmaceutical data that we had and we put it on a graph. And so what this is showing you, it's showing you public supply in the red, private wells in the green, and then surface water in the blue. So although there's less compounds being detected in public supply and private wells, there are pharmaceuticals that are showing up in drinking water supplies. So the question is are there pharmaceuticals that are of interest to your community that are showing up in drinking water supplies at racetracks? And then the graph on the right, I know that there's a lot of names here, but the point is one of the compounds is metformin. Metformin is the most frequently detected pharmaceutical in surface water. It's one of the most frequently detected pharmaceuticals in drinking water. So the question was, is it going to show up at racetracks? So I know Claire kind of already went through some of this. So the goal of this, it's a pilot study. Samples were collected once. We had a couple of barns where we had collections twice, but the goal was to determine if racehorses are exposed to low levels of human use pharmaceuticals through their drinking water at racetracks during racing season across the country. So what we did was we received 35 samples collected from 16 states. We had 2 tracks in Canada by local volunteers between 2023 and 2024. The USGS built the kits with detailed sampling instructions, bottles, photos, etc., and shipped it off to each participating barn. The volunteers collected the sample at their leisure and then sent it back to the USGS. The USGS kind of compiled all of the samples and in batches shipped the samples to our laboratory in Kansas that analyzed each one of them for greater than 80 human use pharmaceuticals. So what did we find? So this is a map showing detections and non-detections across the country. The map shows all the states where samples were collected, and the number in the middle of that circle indicates the number of pharmaceuticals, so the number of individual compounds that were detected in the sample. So the blue circles with 0 mean that we did not detect any pharmaceuticals in that one sample that was collected from that barn. The green circles with the number in it, again, tell you about how many individual compounds were detected when we sampled. I want to note, this is all random. Please don't look at this map and think that you know the racetrack. I just kind of threw the circles on the map. All the racetrack information is anonymized, and we do not release that information. So what we observed is we observed at least one pharmaceutical in 74% of the samples that we collected. We had 9 racetracks, again, as you can see from the blue, that had no detections. In some areas, particularly in Kentucky, along the Ohio River, we detected 10 up or greater than 10 individual compounds. And across our entire study, concentrations range, they're low-level concentrations. They range from not detected, so below our method detection limits, up to 985 nanograms per liter or parts per trillion. And what kind of pharmaceuticals did we see? This is a summary of which compounds were detected, what they're used for, and how many times they were detected. What's important to note is atrazine is an herbicide. It was detected most frequently. That is not surprising. Atrazine tends to be one of our most frequently detected compounds in the environment, particularly in rural areas, just because it's used so heavily in modern agriculture and on row crops. Metformin, which we expected to see in these samples, we detected that in 7 of them. Fluconazole, which is an antifungal, that was detected in 10 of our samples. And then we had sporadic detections of some of the other compounds. But anyway, I want to leave this up for a second just so folks can look at it, but I'm happy to share some of this information later. So where are we going with this? As Clara mentioned, we are working on returning individual results to the individual volunteers. So every volunteer from a barn will get their own individual results. We'll tell them what was detected, what the concentration was, what was analyzed. We'll give them a lot of resources, but they get a letter report from us. I heard that Clara mentioned we have 4 outstanding samples left. So if you volunteered and you're in the audience and you realize, oh my gosh, I still have that kit, we'd love to get that from you. And we're still accepting those kits. We are working with Clara and Thomas on an interpretive scientific publication of the anonymized results. The USGS is a science agency, as I mentioned, so we have to make all of our data publicly available, but all the data will be anonymized. No racetrack information will be released or locational information. We're also open to discussing the addition of more samples if there's interest and, kind of talking about what's next with a study like this. We do have to communicate our results out. So if you're interested in what we do with tap water, feel free to scan this QR code and it will take you to our website. We update this website semi-annually, and the goal would be to get these studies as well as the other studies conducted over the last couple of years up onto our website by the end of this summer. And so lastly, here's my contact information. Like I said, myself and Paul Bradley kind of co-lead this effort, but none of this would have happened without Kristen and Molly. They are our data managers, they are our lifeline. And so they're the reason that folks are getting data back as quickly as they are. And with that, I will stop sharing, and Clara, you can tell me what's next.
Thank you, Kelly. But I just want you to know that I've already worked the room a little bit, and we have a few more than 4 samples that will be coming.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you.
And so with that, I want to throw it open to questions. I know those of you that got your results already may have some questions. So if anybody has a question, I'll repeat it up here, and Kelly will hopefully answer. Does anybody have anything? Yes, Rick. I can repeat the question. So
the benchmark's at 0.
So Kelly, his question specifically about Rick had one of the original full toolbox tests,
Yes.
and he has a uranium positive above benchmark but below the MCL. Can you explain what benchmark and MCL mean? And obviously uranium, that's a cool, there are a couple other, I think, radioactive compounds on his report. So just curious about what that means.
Absolutely. And he's on a private well, if I recall. Yes. So, so the MCL is the maximum contaminant level. So this is what EPA regulates public supply at. So for something like uranium, it has a maximum contaminant level of 30 micrograms per liter. So for a public supply, that water cannot be released above 30 micrograms per liter. But uranium has the potential to be carcinogenic, to cause cancer. So typically carcinogenic compounds have what they call a maximum contaminant level goal of 0. So ideally you want no uranium in your drinking water, but because of cost and things like that, they have to set a maximum contaminant level. So what that's saying for you, Rick, is that you have uranium, which is not surprising because uranium is a natural contaminant and it is found in groundwater in our neck of the woods. And so finding uranium is not uncommon, but if you were in a public supply, if it was above 30 micrograms per liter, they would have to treat that water to get uranium below 30. So for sensitive populations, having something below or above 0 is not, it's not fully recommended, but the regulation is 30.
So not really a risk for young racehorses, but potentially a human being that's at risk, that would be a concern.
So that's what the MCL goal is. It says that EPA calls it sensitive subpopulations. So children, infants, pregnant mothers, folks that are immunocompromised, those are sensitive populations. And that's why they have that MCL goal of 0 for things like uranium. But again, it's all personal perception for your risk.
And Rick's other question was about the risk of basically having a horse test positive. And I think that's outside of Dr. Smalling's wheelhouse, but that would be in our wheelhouse, mine and Dr. Tobin's. And we did have at least 2 sets of results with metformin high enough to cause a positive test under any strict liability, any detected metformin would be a positive, although HISA just proposed in their new set of rules a threshold, and they would be below the threshold. And potentially the biggest issue would be there were a couple of urine only positives, and those could 100% be from drinking water if there's none detected in the blood, but we're getting a urine positive. And I am hopeful that the new regulations that HISA has posed will eliminate that. There were also a few hits on methylcarbamol, which is another big potential positive test issue. And there's one location where we tested it twice, and the metformin was relatively high both times, but they were very different. So again, this testing has more to do with who's at risk for these types of positives, but like at just any single test, might be not high enough, but the next test might be plenty high enough. So it's more of a study to determine who's at risk, or what racetracks or what facilities are at risk. And I think one of the further, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, one of the further things that we want to look at is where the water is coming from for the track that we've tested in relationship to where the water treatment, so the effluent from the water treatment plant, because that would be the highest concentration of these types of organic compounds. So if you have done the testing, but we don't have where your water source is, because some of them we were missing, then we still need that information. And those of you who are still going to collect samples, it'd be really good to try to get that information so that we can add that into our study analysis.
Absolutely. And one other thing to follow up on is if you're on a public supply and you know who your water supplier is, that would be great to include that information as well.
Any other questions? Well, so the question is, could water contamination be a defense in someone's positive test? And the answer is absolutely yes. But again, if you go out and test the water today, you got a positive test 3 weeks ago, you test the water today, that may or may not help you. Just as someone who's testified in these cases, they'll be like, well, that's not enough. Well, the fact that it's there, and the one place where we sampled it twice, it was there high and then higher. It's going to vary day to day. So what we don't have is water the day that your horse was tested. What it does underscore, hopefully for everybody here, is it's really important for us to use this information to put pressure on our regulators to adopt rational thresholds for things that are stable in the environment. And all of these substances that we're finding in water are going to be stable in the environment. I think that looks like it on questions. Do you have anything else to add, Kelly?
No, I don't. I do appreciate allowing us to come and kind of give you an overview. We're excited to get all this data and start interpreting it with Clara and Thomas. And we're just hopeful that this is helpful to the racetrack community. And it gives you guys information to help protect yourselves and your horses. So, anything else we can do, we're here to help.
And then I just one question again that I want to just ask real quick is I believe in one of our conversations, we've had several, that if you were at a high risk racetrack and you were concerned that like a regular water filtration won't remove these substances, but we discussed reverse osmosis, because you could potentially buy in a 5-gallon jug enough for at least the 24 hours pre-race of a reverse osmosis water. And I believe that you mentioned that that removes the majority of organic compounds, is that correct?
Yeah, so you can add treatment. There's, it depends on what you're interested in. Clara, I will share with you, I've got a really great resource from the EPA that talks about every different type of treatment system and kind of what they remove. But yes, the reverse osmosis and just a carbon filter will remove a lot of your organic compounds like pharmaceuticals. So we have pretty good luck with that, but I'll get you that information, Claire, just so you have it.
Super, and we'll make that available to the HBPA members. So I encourage anyone who hasn't jumped in on board to do the water testing to go ahead and contact me, and we will move forward. And that those of you that have tracks that you've already requested and we haven't sent it to you, we'll make sure that gets done. Thank you, Kelly. All right, so again, we've turned this panel into both the medication and also just the ongoing research, which is mostly funded by the HBPA affiliates. So to give you guys updates on what it is you're paying for, those of you who are contributing. Those of you who are not contributing, write us a check. So I pulled in a couple of outside experts to discuss. The question is, are we making progress on breakdowns? And in 2024, it was about 0.95 breakdowns per 1,000 starts, according to HISA. And then there was an uptick to 1.05 in 2025. And the question is, why would there be an uptick? So, our standpoint is the HISA regulations simultaneously changed a whole lot of things. A lot of those changes were not actually based on existing scientific evidence. But when you change a lot of things, you don't know what's contributing to the improvements. You don't know what's contributing to then the subsequent uptick, then assuming that is a significant real problem. Among the things that they did, and I personally credit this with the majority of the decline in breakdowns that we've seen since well before HISA. And that is, we quit, they started canceling races when the track is bad, which is, like, to me, probably the number one thing. The other thing is horsemen are becoming more and more aware that breakdowns occur as a result of accumulated inflammation and damage. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them do. But what they did was they changed medication regulations, made them much more restrictive. They added severe penalties, so that's obviously intended to be something that's going to deter people, a deterrent, so that you wouldn't then potentially run a horse that's bad. So all of these changes were implemented simultaneously, which makes it very difficult to determine if any specific change had an effect. But I just wanted to throw out there some thoughts with me talking to horse trainers and mostly veterinarians, because that's who I get to talk to the most. Why the regulations don't work. So there's no vet's list appeal. Does anybody know of a horse that got put on the vet's list that you go over nose to tail and there's nothing wrong with them? Anybody know about that? Anybody have that happen? There's one or two. There's no appeal. There's no way to say, okay, we did the CT scan, we did the PET scan, there's nothing there. We've jogged the horse, we've trained the horse, we've worked the horse, we can't find anything. The regulatory veterinarian, we've even had surgeons write reports saying they've been over the horse and they can't find anything, and the regulatory veterinarian is unswayed. Why is this important? Well, what the heck? You can just work the horse off the vet's list and go on. It's important because the first time on the vet's list is 2 weeks. The second time is 2 months. Third time's 180 days, and then you're banned for life. So if you use one of those vets list presences as your 14-day, now if you have a real problem the next time, it's automatically 60 days. There's no, let's sit down and talk about this. So that's why it's important. The whole, just get them off the vets list and go on. That's a problem. So there's this specter of my horse that's perfectly fine has got their 1 out of 3 strikes already. So that's a problem. So the result of that particular problem is that more horses are walked into horse races. So if you got a horse that, well, he's got a little arthritis and he's kind of a little bit dinky, but I got to make absolute certain he doesn't get put on the vets list, I'm going to walk him into the race. So that's a real thing that's happening. People are walking more horses into races because they know that that horse with that little bit of arthritis is going to be sounder if you walk him into the race. So that guarantees that that single point exam by the regulatory veterinarian is going to make it more likely that he'll pass inspection. That little arthritis isn't going to contribute to a breakdown, but if it did happen to be something else, like a stress fracture, you walk him into the race, he's going to be sound. But a stress fracture predisposes that horse to injuries. So that is potentially one of the contributing factors to an uptick in breakdowns. And then I mean, I could go on for days with this list, but this is the next one. This is particularly of note to the veterinarians, and that is there's a real problem. So a veterinarian has an appointment this afternoon with a fat riding pony that needs Thyro-L. So I got Thyro-L on my truck this morning. I get searched. I get a suspension. They want to give you two years and $20,000 for having that Thyro-L for the fat pony on your truck that morning. When a veterinarian gets a long suspension, that leaves horses underserved. So if I'm trying to, because I've had to do this a couple times this year, and that is run around and cover horses for some vet that's on a suspension, I don't have time to add that group of horses to my long list. So that horse gets pre-race butte. In Kentucky, we do the pre-race exams, gets the pre-race jog them down and back, maybe a health certificate, and then I'm running to the next horse. So I can't serve those horses like that veterinarian was serving them. That is now on a 45-day suspension. So if you take, so I think it's important for us to lobby or work with or advocate for. You can give the veterinarian a higher fine than a horseman, but let's give them shorter suspensions, because every time you suspend a veterinarian, you are leaving potentially hundreds of horses underserved. So they're not getting, oh, my horse is a little dinky today, but I can't get a vet to come look at him, so I'm just going to walk him a few days and put him right back in work. Whereas otherwise that horse would have been looked at. So that, I think, is potentially another contributing factor to why there may be an uptick in breakdowns. I will say that I predicted when Heisa went in that there would be an immediate decline in breakdowns and then it would go back up. So it's a little bit suspicious. So I'm going to move on to the panel, and I just want to point out that in the 2019 Breeders' Cup, when Mongolian Groom broke down, we, as a veterinary group, the NAARV, wanted to do a more targeted lameness study to see if we could establish that horses that are, one of the arguments on Mongolian Groom was he always went like that. So if we could do longitudinal exams, meaning serial exams month by month or week by week, to demonstrate that this horse always goes like this, then we would have a better way of knowing when there's a change, because it's that change that potentially means something has happened. And so we reached out to the person that we felt was, the world's expert on how to actually objectively measure lameness and determine lameness. And that started our relationship with Dr. Kevin Keegan, who is undisputed in my mind as the world's expert in this subject. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Keegan, who is gonna share with you his thoughts. One of the things that has been touted as something that might help us with breakdowns is this wearable thing, which has gotten a lot of attention, but it's kind of fraught with some problems, and I'd like Dr. Keegan to explain where we are.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? So, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I actually started my horse career 44 years ago as a vet student working at Oak Lawn, shadowing Dr. John Whitaker at Oak Lawn. Many of you probably know him or knew of him. So it's an honor to be here. And I want to start by saying, I didn't know Kent Stirling personally, so when I found out I was gonna be on this panel, I did some homework and researched the man, and what I found was that he was indeed a friend of the horsemen, and I came away with a genuine respect for him because it seemed like he was somebody who was not just reflexively against rules, but he was fighting against bad rules. And his view, I think, was very simple, that if you're going to restrict what trainers and horsemen are going to do with their horses, you need to prove first that whatever regulations that you enforce, that, you know, there's a chance that it's actually going to help. How do I go forward here? Just, oh, okay, good. So that's the idea of this slide here, that you should honor the burden of proof before you impose the burden of compliance. And what I want to argue here today is that this principle should apply to everything in racing, not just to medication, but for training protocols, veterinary examination requirements, race day procedures, and any kind of screening program that is proposed. And it should all pass the same test, and that is, what does the evidence say? Not just because it looks good for a press release, even though that's important too, or not because it's going to satisfy the legislators who maybe doesn't know anything about racing, but you know, that's important too. But that's not going to solve the problem of racetrack breakdown. So let's first talk about what the evidence actually shows about catastrophic musculoskeletal injury in horses. You know, because again, before you can regulate well, you have to know what you're dealing with. I think first, most agree, or at least admit, or that the majority of catastrophic musculoskeletal breakdowns, maybe not all of them, but the majority, they're not random events. They're at the end process of something that has been going on for weeks, possibly months, possibly years. We know that 93% of horses that suffer a fatal catastrophic musculoskeletal injury already had pre-existing bone damage, okay, before the breakdown. We also know that 65%, almost 3/4 of the injuries are in one place, and that's the fetlock, the ankle. So if you're going to look somewhere, that's where you need to concentrate. If you're going to make a dent in it. We also know that horses display lameness, and there are many situations when they don't display lameness, but when they display lameness 3 months before catastrophic injury, there's an increased chance of catastrophic musculoskeletal injury. So these are the things that we know for sure. And you know, we're on solid ground when we try to regulate or study these things. So we know what we're looking for. We're looking for pre-existing injury. And the question is how best to find it. So one proposal, one answer that has been getting a lot of attention recently is wearable sensors. And you know, these are devices that are attached to the horse that measure how the horse is moving during a race or a training event. And then it produces a risk score. Many of you are familiar with this, I'm sure. And I want to be pretty clear about this, and I actually think that this concept of measuring a horse's movement with sensors is a valid, scientifically valid thing to do, because horses do move differently when they have, that's what lameness is. Horses move differently when they have pain, and they frequently do it in ways that are too subtle or too quick so that you're not going to see it. And you're not going, the human eye can sample motion maybe 50 or 60 times per second, and you're just not going to detect it. So I think that this idea of putting wearable sensors on horses that sample motion at, faster than the human eye, is that it's a scientifically valid thing to do. So we know that we can sample motion quicker than the human eye can see. So this is a known thing. But before we mandate or suggest or propose any program that is built on these wearables, at least in my mind, there's two things that have to be true or that have to be enforced. And that is, we should actually know and understand what is being measured. Physiologically, anatomically, we have to know what's being measured. Yeah, they have to explain what it is that they're measuring. So this black box approach that gives you a score without explaining specifically what that is, that's not going to be very beneficial. It's just not acceptable for pulling a horse from a race or preventing the horse from racing in the future. We have to know what it is that is being measured, and it has to make sense. The second thing that we should insist upon is that the statistics work, so that the statistics are clinically meaningful and practical. So let me show you what the current statistics are. So the headline number in this recently published report using wearables is that horses that had the highest risk score, which was a 6, were 44 times more likely to suffer catastrophic musculoskeletal injury than horses with the lowest score. So 44 times. That's a lot. I mean, it seems like a powerful tool. It seems like a no-brainer. We should definitely do this, and we should definitely use the information to do something. But repeating odds ratios, that's what this is, odds ratios. Repeating odds ratios for rare events and catastrophic musculoskeletal injury in horses is a rare event, is extraordinarily misleading. I'd say purposefully misleading. Because when you look at the data, for rare events, you need to find out what the positive predictive value is, which was not in this report. You can get the information out of the report. But the positive predictive value for this 44 times odds ratio was 4.2%. So 96% of the horses were incorrectly flagged. So in plain terms, for every horse that the test got right, 24 horses, it got it wrong. 24 horses were flagged incorrectly. And on the other side, in the horses that did suffer a catastrophic musculoskeletal injury, only 5 of them had a high risk score. So the system missed 91% of the horses that went on to suffer a catastrophic musculoskeletal injury. So the test raises the alarm on horses that it should not 95% of the time, and it misses the horses that actually suffer catastrophic musculoskeletal injury 91% of the time. So, human healthcare has the same, it wrestles with the same dilemmas frequently, and we should take note on what they do because they're saving human lives, which are important too. For example, the PSA test, which is the prostate antigen test for prostate cancer in men, and the CA, which is carbohydrate antigen 125 blood test for ovarian cancer in women. Both of these tests boast high odds ratios. And both of them, when they were examined honestly for their positive predictive value in actual practice, were found to cause more harm than good. To the sheer number of people wrongly alarmed and sent for unnecessary procedures. So the PSA test now is actively recommended against by the United States Preventative Services Task Force. They don't recommend that. And the CA 125 test, which is a blood test, was never approved for the same reason. And also note that the positive predictive values for these human tests that save human lives were much higher than this wearable study saves equine lives. So we should take note of that. So human tests that were better were not approved. Okay. So, and that is dealing with human lives. Okay. So the simple idea of a single screening procedure is probably not the answer. So what could be better? So maybe what is better? We know that horses, the movie started on its own, very good. So we know that horses with dangerous pre-existing injury will frequently not show lameness, or they will show lameness, or the lameness may be very subtle, especially when the horse is excited, like before the race, the adrenaline level is high. And as Dr. Fenger, the horse has been rested for a couple of days. Certainly during the race, it may not show anything. During the train event, it may not show anything. Well, one thing we do know, and this is very characteristic of stress fractures, which again, 95%, or not 95%, but the majority of catastrophic musculoskeletal injuries in horses are bone. And we know that it's a very characteristic feature of stress fractures that horses are lame, are most lame, or will be measured most lame, like the day after the exercise. So the lameness is much more likely to be displayed and to be detectable post-exercise, not before, not during, but after. So this is a well-known phenomenon. So what is more likely to be successful for screening is measuring for lameness frequently, objectively, at higher sampling frequencies than the human eye can detect, and especially after a race or training event. And then tracking each horse against its own prior measurements over time. This is what this horse on the lower left there is a horse that fractured its tibia after, but you see that the red circles are when the horse measured outside of its 95% confidence interval. And so the horse suddenly developed lameness it didn't have before, and it stayed that way. And then the horse later suffered a muscular. This is just one example, but so a horse that suddenly develops a persistent lameness after workouts and then stays that way on successive measurements, that's probably something wrong with the horse. Okay, the movie started. So, and for horses that are kept being flagged during regular lameness monitoring, the right step is 3D imaging. And the right tool, because it is not because it's the best tool, but because it is ultimately very practical, is true standing fan beamed. And we'll discuss why fan beam is better than, for instance, cone beam. But true standing fan beamed CT Because you see, here's a horse that we are scanning and it takes less than 2 minutes. And the horse is standing there, both limbs are imaged simultaneously, weight bearing, and the procedure is done in 2 minutes. Okay. So now, and I'm not repurposed human portable CT machines where you have to pick up the horse's leg and stick it in the scanner because there's more chance of movement and radiation exposure to the personnel. There are many reasons, but true standing fan beamed CT. So virtually all the dangerous pathology is bone, not soft tissue. Almost all of it is bone, and this is the perfect tool for analyzing bone. So, and this is now not hypothetical. This has been done in Australia. Professor Chris Whitten at the University of Melbourne, it was made mandatory that every horse that was going to race in the spring carnival in the Melbourne Cup needed to have a standing CT exam. And if they found some pre-existing bone pathology, then the horse was not allowed to race. Now, I'm not proposing that every horse be evaluated with standing CT. That would not be practical. But maybe certainly for a horse that is successively flagged during routine lameness evaluations, because across 3 successive years he had 0 catastrophic musculoskeletal injuries. So true standing fan beam CT will see things definitively better than, for instance, digital radiography, because it's a three-dimensional evaluation, not 2-dimensional. So this is what the evidence shows. This is just some CT images that show the fetlock pathology. So here's the proposed program that has, I think, a high chance of success. Besides being ultimately very practical, any screening test has to be practical. It has to be done completely non-invasively, and it has to be done very quickly, and it has to be relatively inexpensive. So regular objective lameness evaluation using body-mounted inertial sensors done post-exercise, tracked over time against each horse's own baseline, followed by targeted true standing CT, fan beam CT, at regional centers for horses that keep raising the alarm. So, and for every rule that we consider making in racing, it has to have the evidence behind it. So you have to ask for the positive predictive value, not odds ratios. Ask whether the burden of the falsely flagged majority has been weighed against the benefit of a few correctly identified animals. So this is what I think we need to do. And I thank you for your attention, and we can answer any questions you might have.
I want to point out that, while it would be difficult to do from a standpoint of, every horse all of the time, this is actually a technology, if we could adopt this, it's a technology that we could employ for every Breeders' Cup horse within the week prior to racing. So it is actually on a day like Breeders' Cup or a race like Breeders' Cup that could be done.
Hello, Dr. Finger. Thank you, Dr. Kevin Keegan, for that presentation. It was very educational. John Moss, Iowa HBPA Executive Director. A couple questions. Cost for a fan beam CT, and then secondly, are you using ACE or some other drug in order to get them to stand there? How do horses typically behave with that scenario? I know it's black, it's underneath them, less likely to be invasive. They may not react, but I'm just kind of curious in terms of actual how they handle having that floor come up beneath them like that and contract. So again, cost and horse behavior in relation to that.
Yeah, so can you hear me? Okay. So we have done now about almost 600 scans. And we have never had an incident. Of course, well, most of our horses are quarter horses, but we've done, quarter horses are sometimes crazy too, but, so we have never had an incident. We do sedate them. Well, most horses, not 100% of the horses, we give them mild sedation and we put a blinder on them so they don't see the machine going up, but we've never had a problem. We have had a couple of problems because we do heads too, head and neck. And that's a little bit more difficult. We had a couple of horses where we just couldn't get it done because of the machine. So we have never had an issue. I've had people come from Europe and say, oh, there's no way that our horses in Europe are going to stand for this. But again, that it's they're not seeing what's happening. And we have never had an incident. So we do sedate them lightly, not all horses, but like 95% of the horses we sedate. How much does it cost? Well, that depends, you mean how much does it cost to install or what it costs per horse? Okay, so the cost for installation really depends upon where it's put because you have to dig a hole in the ground or you can create a platform because it has to go up and down. So in our case, we had to make a hole in bedrock. So it costs a lot of money. But if most places, it's not going to cost a lot for the site preparation. And it's about the same as the PET scan machines. I think we spent about $500,000 at our site for the entire thing. But that's not for everybody. And we try to keep the cost low for all owners. We charge $870. And the administration is constantly trying to get it higher, but we want to use it as a routine tool. Like we use digital radiography. In fact, it's easier than digital radiography, and the personnel are exposed to less radiation because to get the same information with digital radiographs, you have to X-ray the horse, I don't know, like 50 times, and that's a lot of radiation, and it takes a lot of time. We're finished in 2 minutes, so you have to look at the cost per horse and time per horse. I think it's very inexpensive. We can do, we could potentially do 20 horses in an hour, easy. So cost per horse is very low.
Dr. Keegan, while we get to the next question, I think you answered mine, but obviously you built a facility with the unit. Are there portable units?
Well, you could make it portable. Right now, there are no portable units, but you could make it portable. I mean, like, for instance, you could put it in a truck probably. And, or a semi. There are no, right now, portable units. No. Well, there are portable CT units, but you have to pick the horse's leg up and stick it in. And that is not practical because you're only doing one leg. If the horse is not standing on the leg, takes more time. So, yeah.
At the Melbourne Cup Carnival or whatever, do you know the number of horses or percentage of horses that were scratched as a result of the scan results?
I cannot remember. It was a low percentage. I think it was like less than 3% or I can't remember exactly, but it was a small number.
Hang on, Bernard.
Can you use this process in lieu of x-rays?
Yes, for sure. In fact, it's better than x-rays because it's faster. And of course, it's three-dimensional. So the problem with radiographs is you're taking a three-dimensional structure and you're squishing it into a two-dimensional image. So there's all kinds of overlaps that you don't see especially if it's in the center of the bone, you don't see the change because it's overshadowed by normal bone surrounding it. So you cannot get, so CT is three-dimensional. You can look at all the different cross sections and thin slices. So it's like, it's ultimately much more sensitive and it is quicker and you get less radiation exposure.
I'll comment to that too, because as a practitioner, if I have a horse that I suspect a stress fracture and an ankle, I'll shoot no less than 10 radiographs on the Flex DP view, which is where you see the palmar bone, which is where you're looking for stress fractures. I'll be taking 10 slices because you got to hit that fracture exactly perpendicular or parallel, I guess, to the fracture line, or you won't see it. And so not only do I take 10 Flex DP slices, I also do it again 10 days later because after the initial fracture, you start getting a little bone resorption around the fracture, so it's easier to see 10 days later. So I've got 20 radiographs and 10 days versus 2 minutes. But we don't have one of those where I live.
So yeah, that is the disadvantage. You get mid radius, so between the elbow and the carpus, and mid tibia, so between the stifle and the hock. So, but again, 95% of the injuries, especially thoroughbreds, quarter horses, they have a more higher percentage of like vertebral fractures and like humeral fractures. But yeah, all the areas that are commonly affected in catastrophic musculoskeletal injury are covered by the true standing CT. And I'm not exactly sure why this has not been adopted by the racing industry, because you could have regional centers where instead of, I believe that there's a lot of emphasis, for instance, on PET scanning, and PET scanning is very sensitive and but it's not going to be a screening tool because it takes a long time. You inject the horse with radiopharmaceuticals. It's just, it's sort of invasive. So, but yeah, I don't understand why they're racing. To me, this is obvious that, again, most of the injuries are bone and you want very sensitive and accurate bone imaging. And it's very fast. But, I don't think you should do every horse like they did at the Melbourne Cup. They did every horse. I think you should use regular, good, not necessarily have to be objective body mounted inertial sensors, but you should use something that you can measure and record and follow over time easily and have it the same tool to measure the lameness. And the other thing I believe that is important is you should get a lot of data. So for instance, trotting the horse up and down a few times is not going to do it. I mean, you'd want to get, the horse going all the way around the track. That's why the inertial sensors are better than, like, for instance, filming the horse. Filming the horse, you're going to get a few strides. Also, when you film horses, in order to get true 3D measurement, you actually need two orthogonal views, and you can't do it. Again, it's like the difference between CT and radiographs. If you're filming with one view, you're not getting true three-dimensional. And movement outside of the plane and parallax air, and the horse gets farther away, and so your accuracy goes way down. You need something that stays with the horse and maybe go all the way around the track. So like, for instance, the Stride Safe wearable, that's again, I think that has scientific merit. The only problem with that is you don't exactly know what the score is. You don't know why the score is 6. They don't tell you. You can't, any scientific, something that's scientific that has good evidence, somebody should be able to repeat it. You should describe it well enough that someone else could repeat the study. That's a basic scientific fact part that you, nobody can do that because nobody really knows what they're measuring. And so I think, wearable, putting something on the horse is it's scientifically valid, but I don't think the way they're doing it is the best. The other thing is they put it on the saddle pad and it flops up and down. And so you have noise and you have to suppress that noise so you can extract the signal from it. And in that process of subduing the noise, you miss things. So I believe that if you're going to use a wearable, that you should put it directly on the horse. I mean, it should be attached to the horse. And it moves up and down as the horse moves up and down it doesn't move independently. But I mean, they sample at 800 frames or 800 samples per second, which is significantly higher than the human eye. Like the inertial sensors that we make sample at 200 times per second. And that's another disadvantage of filming because you're filming usually at 30 or 60 frames per second, which is really no better than the human eye. So you're just repeating what you could do with your eye. I mean, if you're going to actually be accurate, you need to film with a higher frame rate, which you're not going to get from, you have to have special cameras for that.
Any more questions for Dr. Keegan? All right, we're going to move on to Dr. Meyer. Dr. James Meyer is a veterinarian. He's board certified in internal medicine. And he has a master's degree in medical statistics from the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford. He's practiced in many countries, including Europe, Dubai, obviously here. And he has basically integrated his statistical training with his clinical training and has just a lot of very useful information for us. Having a statistics expert that we can go to is really important because a lot of times things like the horse is 44 times more likely to break down. It's more meaningful to understand the statistics for why they can say that or why they feel like they can say that. His current research is focused on large-scale data analysis to better understand injury patterns and pharmacoepidemiology in racehorses, with the goal of improving safety and welfare in thoroughbred racing. So Dr. Meyer is new to this group, so we welcome him. Thanks for coming, Doc. And I'm going to pass the mic over to Jim Meyer.
Thank you very much. Just thinking that other than free food and drink, there's nothing to draw an audience like a talk on statistics. I was thinking there's nothing that quite spans the emotional spectrum like horse racing, from tremendous highs of a newborn foal with hope and aspiration to a courageous racehorse that inspires us. And then there's the contrast of the lows when the crowd gets quiet after a catastrophic musculoskeletal injury that ripples across the industry. Thankfully, those events are rare, but our purview is it is imperative that we prioritize the welfare and safety of the horse. And in that vein, numbers and thoughtful analysis can tell us where we are and potentially where we want to go. So we know this equine injury database started in 2009. It tracks injuries, fatal injuries within 72 hours of a race. Not just musculoskeletal, but the majority are musculoskeletal. As I say here, it's somewhat of a scoreboard. It gives us numbers. We can track those numbers, but like a scoreboard at NFL football game or baseball game, we can't tell from that number how we got there, who hit the home run, or was it a run into the touchdown for the touchdown or a pass. So this information is a great surveillance tool, but it can't tell us why. In 2009, when it started, the rate of fatalities was 2 per 1,000 starts. That came from approximately 450,000 racing starts and 770 fatal or fatalities. Then in 2024, we're down to 1.1 fatalities per 1,000 starts. The number of race starts dropped approximately 150,000, and the number of fatalities dropped to approximately 270. So we're declining, and we know we're declining not just because of the number of starts is declining, because the number of fatalities from 2009 to 2024 dropped 66%. The number of race starts has dropped approximately 40%. The challenge with analyzing or looking at this data is that these, as Dr. Keegan mentioned, are rare events, and rare events bring with them a lot of variability, a lot of noise. If you think somewhat analogously to flipping a coin, if you flipped a coin 10 times and you got heads 9 times, you wouldn't be too alarmed. But if you flipped it 10,000 times and you got 9,000 heads, you'd think there's something wrong with the coin. Small samples jump around a lot, and the larger the sample, the more settled it becomes. Once again, here's how the fatalities are calculated. The numerator is whether a horse dies within or is euthanized within 72 hours of a race. The denominator is the number of starts times 1,000. Now, one of the challenges with the denominator, race starts times 1,000, is that it's a mixed group. It includes starts, but each individual horse in the data set may not have one start. They probably have multiple starts, whereas some horses will have few starts, and the one with more starts contributes more to it. And potentially there's some survivorship bias. A horse that runs more is healthier in many ways. So that potentially dilutes the number. Also, there are different trainers, different track surfaces, all mixed into one number. And that can change over time. We know that since the data started, a number of racetracks are no longer around, probably some trainers no longer around. And the mix of horses, the risk profile of the horse may have changed from 2009 to 2024. We don't know that, and even though the numbers have gone down, we don't know what impacted the risk profile. So there's a lot of uncertainty in these numbers. This is from the data set for 2-year-olds. 2-year-olds have the fewest number of races per year, and therefore the most variability in the data. What you're looking at there is the dots represent the number that would be probably presented to the public. So they'll say in 2009, the rate was 1.4 per 1,000 starts, but they generally don't report the range of values or the uncertainty, which is the 95% confidence interval. You may see that when, they talk about plus or minus margin of error in polling, etc. So statistically, it was plausible in the first year that it could range from 1.03 to 1.86. You can see that over the entirety of the data set, that pretty well all the confidence intervals overlap. One that drew a lot of attention was 2020 because the rate went up significantly from the previous year, although the confidence interval overlaps with the previous year. And a paper was written on this with theories as to why. That's obviously COVID year. And there was some thought that the training of 2-year-olds and closures of tracks, etc., may have delayed the training of young horses. Not proven. And actually, statistically, when they showed there is no difference between the 2 years, and you can see after 2020, we go back to the sort of the similar event rate. The dotted red line is the average rate over the 15 years of the sample, which was around 1.27 fatalities per 1,000 starts. And 2-year-olds have the lowest number of any age group. Now, when these statistics are reported, you frequently see in the headlines that rates dropped by 10%. Rates went up by 12%. Percent change can be misleading, especially if you have small numbers. So if the data is coming from a small track or a track with a meet that's short, you can get a lot of variability year to year, and you'll end up with in the top left plot the dots, as you can see. When the fatality rate is less than 100, they're all over the place. Or when it's less than 50, I would say. So, as an example, some tracks have no fatalities, but if they had 1 and then you go to 3 the next year, a 200% increase sounds incredible, but in fact, 2 fatalities may not, I mean, every fatality is important, but it may not be as alarming as saying 200%. So be careful when you read about percentage changes. You'll see that year to year, the percentage change varies a lot in this data set. The red bars show us years where the fatality rate went up, and the green years where it went down. The percentages for the down years are higher because the trend is that it's decreasing. You'll see frequently a year where the rate went down a lot or a year where it went up a lot is followed by a year in the opposite direction. And that's known as regression to the mean. This is a concept that was discovered or determined many years ago by a British statistician named Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin. He measured the heights of parents at a fair and compared that to the children's heights. And in general, if the parents are tall, the child is taller than average but shorter than the parents. If the children are short, the child's taller than their parents but shorter than average. Anyway, we all tend to head towards the average height, otherwise we'd have 9-foot tall humans. He called it regression to mediocrity, but because of that, the connotation of mediocrity, it got changed to regression to the mean. Another example, if you ever heard of the Sports Illustrated cover curse, used to be that if an athlete was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, they didn't want to be on the cover because the next year their success was muted. If the baseball player hit 380 that year, he might drop down to 100 points. And the reason for that is part of it is regression to the mean. They get on the cover when they have their best year, and they go back to their average after that. So one important point of regression to the mean is that after a particular spike, say, was it 2020 as well? Anyway, the spike at Santa Anita was a large spike. There were regulations and implementations obviously needed to bring that down, or hopefully bring it down, but it was likely to come down on its own as well due to regression to the mean. So it's an important concept to understand. You're going to see a lot of spikes in this data, but it eventually comes to its level. And here's just an example. These are 2-year-olds. The blue data on the right is not real data. That's just taking the numbers, the mean, the average number of breakdowns and simulating, due to the variance in them, what it would look like. And so you can see there's lots of ups and downs. The left is the real data. And one interesting, and there's similar ups and downs, but you can see since 2017, 2018, the trend is definitely downward, and it's down relatively consistently. There's one spike there, but it's still the trend is going down. This is on dirt, by the way. So the blue is fake data, the red is the real data. We can model the data, and it's similar to, I mean, sometimes you'll see this with the Dow Jones average or something. You have a moving average where you take the preceding years and you get the average and you keep moving along and you get a smoother curve or here in this case, linear plots. Poisson model is just, these are counts. This is not a distribution like a bell curve or whatever. These are counts. Rare events are measured as counts because they're rare. And so that's the way it's modeled. And you can see the trend is downward for all ages. The sort of mountain-like light blue peaks in the background are the confidence intervals. You can see they're much larger for the 2-year-olds than any other age group because there's fewer horses in that group. On the right is a funnel plot that shows this is from real data, the distribution of fatalities per 1,000 starts based on the total number of starts, and then there's the different age groups and surfaces. But to the left, where there's fewer starts, you can see the numbers bounce around a lot. As you go to the right and you get more starts, the numbers start coming closer to the mean. Data points that are outside the funnel plot, that are outside those intervals, probably warrant investigation. The point that I'll make is that from this data, you cannot state the cause of why the fatality rate went up or down, or we can't even say from this data why it's gone down since 2009. You need to get more granular, probably look into the data, the track surfaces, risk factors for the horses, and they have that information. But this data gives us trends. It's descriptive data. We can't get causality from it. So if you model it, you get rid of a lot of that noise. Those ups and downs over the years are the crude rate. You can see it goes up and down, but overall, it's been dropping. In fact, the drop has been fairly consistent, around 3% per year. And the overall drop from 2009 to 2024 is 40%. Now, if we model it another way, which is a generalized additive model, where we allow it to curve a little bit, it still gives us the same information. All groups are going down. It's interesting that the 4-year-olds have been very consistent in their drop in fatality rates. It's linear, in fact, just consistently dropping year to year. And the numbers seem to be converging at a lower rate. Once again, the color, the width is how uncertain we are about that evidence. But there's no doubt that the numbers are dropping. Is that a change in the denominator? Is that a change in the risk profile of horses? Were tracks that aren't around anymore more dangerous? Dr. Fenger pointed out very nicely that not racing on off tracks and bad surfaces may have a impact on that. I can't tell you from this data. Everybody can give you an opinion, but I can't say with certainty. But the overall trend is a decrease. If you pick segments of the data, if you take 2 years or 1 year, you'll certainly come to conclusions that we have a crisis or that we've made a breakthrough or that we're stalled. Similar to stock market movements and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you looked at the Dow Jones, it's gone up, the trend is up, but there's obviously ups and downs in that. So that's similar with this data. If you take smaller the time frame, you're going to see more noise. So what I'd say is that this EID data is really, really transparent. It's really useful. I got all of this online. It's available. The numbers are there. Not all tracks put their data online, but many do. It's useful for watching trends. I don't think it's particularly useful for reacting to a single year change, which is frequently what grabs the headlines. I'd be cautious comparing small groups, cautious with tracks that have few races. You can use it to compare between surfaces, ages, etc., distances. You can generate hypotheses that can be tested and looked at for causality. So it gives us an overview. But be careful getting too up and celebrating that, in 1 year the rate's gone down a lot, or panicking if it goes up. So these are rare events. Be careful evaluating percentage change. Be careful over interpreting a 1 year change. That doesn't mean you don't look into it. Obviously, all this information is important. The more years you have, the better you can see the pattern of what's occurring. And, caution, I'd say conservatism in interpretation is important. And it's really important when those numbers are put out to see what the raw numbers are. In other words, to say that 0.95 to 1.05 is an increase, I would want to know what were the exact number of starts in each year, because as the starts go down, the uncertainty increases. So to compare those 2 years, you would need the raw fatalities and the raw number of racing starts. So in conclusion, I'd say let's remember these are numbers. Every number in this data set represents a horse. A horse that someone bred, trained, and someone got up very early in the morning to take care of. They represented the dreams and hopes of people and inspired us with their incredible athletic activity. But we don't measure to reduce horses to simple numbers. We measure the data because each horse matters. Thank you.
Does anybody have questions for Dr. Meyer specifically? The couple things I want to mention are Maria and Ed. Dr. Meyer is interested in doing some comparisons with the non-HISA tracks and the HISA tracks. So you've now met him. This is who will be reaching out to you to get that information to do some of this type of analysis. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that now you've met him. So when he calls you, that's what it's about. And it's just part of scientific endeavor.
Dr. Martin, thank you very much. One of the things that I've kind of always used as a reference, I've always kind of said, whether you're foaling mares or it's, breakdowns at racetracks, I always kind of have this wave because I believe everything kind of works in a bell curve. And I think we saw it at Santa Anita during the tragedies there, but it was pretty much recorded while all of the breakdowns broke down in the spate. It was actually the second lowest period of time or number of breakdowns they'd had in a race meet in a few years. So is that kind of what you're seeing, with I think I like the new term. I'll start to use regression to the mean. Is that kind of what you see is basically you have these spikes, but it's going to settle back down? That's what you see typically?
You do, you definitely see that. I did look in the data set, they had data by track. And so the Santa Anita data was there. And from what I saw was that the majority, the increase in the breakdowns was actually in one age group, 3-year-olds. And predominantly on one of the turf tracks, from what I understand. So that gives you information. You know, there's a specific spot, an area where they're occurring. But yes, most of the time, and especially when you're aggregating this data, I like baseball, and they used to say the player's going to come back to his batting average on the back of his card. They might have a spurt where they go really hot and really slow, but over time, they get to the average. I think we're getting to an average with fatalities. So yes, what I would say is don't ignore a spike, but also understand that it's most likely to come back on its own to the mean.
And one last question, unless somebody else has one, but one of the things that's frustrated a lot of us, me especially, is the constant comparison to fatalities that occur, let's just say internationally, but England, Europe, France, and I was glad to see that you had that notation up there that in the US, typically, or we're supposed to have euthanized within 72 hours of the event at the track. Have you looked at any of the work in the other countries? The reason I ask is it's always been my understanding in the way their rule is written, a euthanized horse on the course is the only one that they count. So they don't, if the horse is able to trailer and go to a clinic, even though it may be within 24 hours, if it's euthanized, they don't count it. Is that something you've looked at all?
I haven't specifically. I can say that I have heard that. One thing to remember on our data is that it doesn't just include fatal musculoskeletal injuries. A horse could have an arrhythmia, it could colic, it could be some other reason. The majority are musculoskeletal. I think close to 20% are non-musculoskeletal. So it's aggregating data we have a lot of different reasons. I know looking at the one sport, the one equine sport where there's a higher fatality, much higher, is steeplechase racing. But I think Dr. Finger may be able to speak to this. I think you told me that in Europe, they do just look at on-track fatalities or on-site fatalities.
That is my understanding. I do know in the UK, they very specifically has stated that, but we believe that to be true in the other jurisdictions as well.
But that's exceedingly important. Obviously, that I mentioned, it's a fraction, numerator over denominator. They're not I mean, and they could be different. You're looking at different things. It's like you mentioned comparing HISA tracks to non-HISA. They have to be exchangeable. The risk profile for the horses on each place you're comparing has to be similar. Otherwise, the comparison is not very valid. So, ages, maybe value, all these things should be what they call exchangeable. And only one thing is different, the regulation. So there's some metrics and ways to do that for causal inference that, they're called quasi-experimental studies, but I'm kind of jumping ahead there. But what you make is really one of the great points is that the definition of fatality is not consistent.
Right. Well, and the other thing that gets me when there is this unfortunate comparison and flag waving of lower fatalities in non-HISA states, pre-HISA states, they calculate or utilize all of their fatalities. And I mean that to say they have no synthetic tracks in the current 2 non-HISA states, or Nebraska for that matter. So when you do look at historically in the equine injury database, the synthetic tracks are typically much lower per thousand. So I don't know if that statistically merits into it, but at least if they were comparing apples to apples, they would, you would think, pull out all of their numbers to at least try to get a fair comparison. But obviously they're just trying to tout something that's unfortunate.
You would need to put in all the variables that you thought had an impact on fatalities that you had available to you, and certainly the track surface would be one of them, yeah.
How do you incorporate fatalities and workouts into this? Because it would skew the denominator, would it not?
So there's nothing with workouts listed in this data set. It's just racetrack injuries or breakdowns. My understanding is that HISE is keeping track of workout training fatalities, but are you asking specifically number of workouts or how you would, or types of workouts prior to? Yeah, I don't know if that data is available. There may be some risk factor studies where they've looked at that, but no, it's not in this, and I'm certain it's important. Yes. This is pretty, I want to say course data, where you all, since you're intimately involved with this book, all the variables that could lead to it, and that's not in there. One of the differences, Dr. Keegan is looking at something that is becoming more and more interested. People are more and more interested in is predicting injury in the individual horse. This is a population level database that doesn't give me anything on the individual horse. In fact, the number that's in the denominator, it's race starts, so I can't even use that. It's not horse years or horse. This is not a percent. This doesn't tell you how many horses percentage-wise breakdown. It's by start, and so it's the easiest thing because that's the way that's what they're giving you a time window when the horse dies, which is 72 hours after the race. But there's a lot of more information that could be utilized, and that's why statistics alone it gives you some. Okay, statistics can give you uncertainty in what your measurements are and trends, etc. But having domain knowledge from the people who are on the ground is as critical. Wow, it's probably more critical than the numbers themselves. People who can give you inside information on what they're seeing, etc.
So I have just a crazy comment. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Marianne.
Just one question. One of my biggest frustrations have been with data in the wrong hands. And especially when that person may be considered the scientist in the room above because the other ones aren't, is setting policy because of the assumption that correlation is causation. And say, okay, now we're going to set policy because, brown horses broke down more than gray horses. So now maybe we should look at, bays and chestnuts a little bit more than gray horses. That maybe they break down more and we shouldn't allow them to race. I mean, that's like extreme, that didn't happen, but just extreme case as an example. And I see it all the time especially in reports given publicly to regulators by, like our regulatory vet. And how do you defend that by, and say, this is really just a correlation. You haven't proved it. You need to do more investigating to find out this cause.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I do some statistical review for the Journal of Veterinary Internal Medicine, and it's not limited to the public. I mean, a lot of papers jump from correlation to causation. Causal inference is a big area of research and interest. Determining causes is not easy. From most of our information, human and everything, is observational. So they'll tell you, randomized controlled trials are the gold standard for causation. But we can't do those all the time, so we have to use observational data. Sometimes you can use a regulatory change as what they call an instrumental variable to see if these things, if it's truly a causal association. But a lot of times, it's confounding. It's like saying, what's the classic one? When ice cream sales go up, shark attacks go up. And we know that there's a third variable there, the weather, but these kinds of things are common, and I think a lot of the research gets put out there. Here's the way people think. If the research confirms my pre-existing opinion, it's good research. If it doesn't, it's bad research. So.
Got another question. So
Go ahead.
Jim obviously read the room wrong. We are a stat-friendly group here. We love it.
I'm Bill Walmsley from Arkansas, and I just want to remind everybody here what I remember from about 25, 30 years ago. I can remember a time when a substantial portion of this industry did not want to keep any of those records. They didn't want to know. They absolutely were not, wanted, ignorance was bliss. And we've come so far in less than a generation, Doctor, that I commend all of y'all, but that shows how much we can do and how short a period of time. Because I can sure remember when it was totally contrary to the position that what you're doing. So I just want to commend you for that.
So I want to comment, and this is actually a follow-up on something that Jim said a minute ago, and that is, does anybody know where the convention of breakdown per 1,000 starts came from? Anybody know?
No.
Hong Kong. Okay, so the average number of starts in this country is 6, and the average number of starts in Hong Kong per year is 8. So I don't know. Are their horses sounder? Are their horses better? Are they better at entering? No, they have a complete population of about 1,500 horses. And if they end up with a group of horses in a certain condition where there's not enough horses to make the races go, those are the horses that they import into Hong Kong. So how many people here would love to race your horse? You got a sound horse, it's ready to go, it likes racing, and it wants to race 8 times a year, but you can't get in. How many people? How many people feel that? Okay, every hand in the room goes up. So what Hong Kong did is they artificially set up a measurement, breakdowns per 1,000 starts, that favors the Hong Kong model, where you can go back. If you actually do it by year, if we normalize it per year, it would be something that's different. And so just to say it's kind of a silly, it's kind of a silly way to express it, but we just did it because Hong Kong did it, and then we're stuck with it.
Before we turn it over to Dr. Tobin, which I know everybody wants to hear and give plenty of time, based a little bit off of what Mary Ann was saying, if I could bring in Dr. Keegan, looking at that correlation statistic, I think from your slide was 93% pre-existing injuries. One of the fights or semantic fights that some of us have had going back and forth is the definition of pre-existing injury. Because right or wrong, I've thrown out, transphyseal screws, transphyseal bridges. Is that the start, or is there a generation or something that generates a pre-existing injury to an animal? All the way back to periosteal strippings. Is there a true definition of pre-existing injuries that laymen may not be aware of, that is more scientific to make that a better statistic than not? Because we feel trainers get blamed a lot for things that happen to, in particular, to 2-year-olds and maybe early 3-year-olds that may have been brewing since they were a weanling being sales prepped.
I can tell you that 90. I can tell you that the definition of pre-existing injury is pretty clear, and it's all pathologic, and it's postmortem, and it's histopathological. There's changes in the structure of the trabecular bone, of the bone, that is found. And also in the other leg. So it is a necropsy-based bone evaluation histopathology. So yeah, it's pretty definitive as far as measuring it and identifying it. I mean, I don't know what the exact definition is, but it looks like.
I want to comment about that. That's an exercise physiology thing. And that is normal modeling bone involves microfractures of trabecular and cortical bone that are then repaired into a stronger structure. And so that's a normal response to training is microfractures. And obviously there's been done studies where they go to even 18-month-old yearlings just starting, where there's evidence of all of this. There's a continuum from normal to abnormal. And I don't know if a pathologist can tell. And I also don't know if we as veterinarians can tell when it goes from the normal remodeling to now this is a serious problem and it predisposes to injury. So for example, the horse with the pathology in the other leg, obviously it progressed a little further faster in this one and not the one that didn't break down. But how many horses are out there with the exact same amount of pathology that aren't breaking down? And I think those horses are out there as well.
Yeah, but I mean, they can differentiate bone loss or bone trauma from the healing response. So it's a balancing thing, lysis compared with sclerosis. So they can tell that if the healing is keeping up with the damage or not. So it's not just they can measure histopathologically damage and repair. And it's a balancing act between the two. So yes, it's true. Obviously, horses have micro damage, but then they repair it. And you can tell if the repair is keeping up with the damage. Histopathologically. Now, I don't know if you can do that, and if it's, we don't know for sure if you can do that with CT, for instance, accurately. Probably you can if you get enough data. But we're certainly not there yet. But yes, of course, every horse, dog, also people that goes through intense exercise is going to have micro damage to the bone. It's always going to happen. But the healing response should keep up. And that's what they're finding in horses histopathologically, is that the healing is not keeping up with the damage.
I have one more question.
When you talk about it being detected that it had existing injury during necropsy, was it necessarily diagnosable prior to the fatality? Was it a pre-existing injury that was known, or could it have been a pre-existing injury that was not known?
Well, in the studies that have been done, the necropsy studies that have been done, no, that's not. My personal feeling is, yes, you can. By serial evaluation of the clinical sign of lameness and by CT.
And I'm going to point out that the regulators presume when this happens, and this is where there's a big disconnect between the understanding by the regulators and what we face every day, is they presume that your horse is lame before this happens. And of course, being in the trenches with you guys, I know that is not true. I know a lot of times you can't tell. I will tell you Now, we've been doing a lameness locator study now for about 5 years, where maybe longer, where we start evaluating them with this objective lameness locator, Dr. Keegan's technology, start approximately monthly, starting with the before they're broke as yearlings. And some of the things that could eventually become a breakdown injury, meaning bone bruising, etc. I'm picking up variations on the lameness locator well in advance of the horse becoming lame enough for me, or we'll just use the acronym or the terminology that we use on the backside, state vet lame, right? So they're not state vet lame, but I'm picking up something new that wasn't there before using the lameness locator technology. Now, when I first started doing the study, I was trying to do it all research, right? So I wouldn't actually evaluate this. So I had somebody else do the lameness locator, and I didn't get the data. And now, because I'm unwilling to not see the data because I want to know. Now I'm looking at the data more rigorously, and like just like this last year, a really nice 2-year-old, but probably raced at least one time too many, where I should have listened to the lameness locator data, state vet sound the entire time until after her last race, and then she's going to be a project to get back to the races. So, and again, that was not a breakdown. But it was bone bruising, bone trauma, which is exactly what we're saying. That's that breakdown of bone that then doesn't get a chance to keep up. The healing doesn't get a chance to keep up. And I could have identified that. I could have acted on that earlier than I did, had I been paying closer attention to my lameness locator data. So, that's just an interesting thing, because there's nobody, the rider didn't identify her being off. And without the lameness locator, we would not have known. So again, serial objective evaluation. Any other questions for the?
I mean, one other possible tool that is being studied that I think would be useful is bone mineral density studies. Because, I mean, I don't exactly know how to do that, but that would be a measurement of the balance between damage and healing. Because definitely damage occurs. And definitely healing occurs. And I think you can measure those and just got to figure out which one is greater.
So our final speaker, we're going back to the medication part of the panel discussion. Our final speaker is needs no introduction. It's Dr. Tom Tobin. He's been basically working for you since 1976, and here he is again. So he's going to wrap up probably one of the recent studies that we're looking at. So without further ado, Dr. Tobin.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be here and good to see you all. I'm going to speak it's going to be simple, it's going to be straightforward, and hopefully we've made a little progress in the area. I'm going to speak about urine identifications with no pharmacologically relevant plasma concentrations. And I'm going to focus particularly on dietary and environmental substances. I'm not going to deal with therapeutic medications because that's basically worked out. But we're seeing identifications of dietary and environmental substances, and the position I'm taking is that for most of those, we should simply look at plasma concentrations and ignore the urine data. And I'm going to show you why with regards to the urine data. Now, let me figure out, see, what do I do? Press the red button? The right. This is a conservative statement. Urinary concentrations of substances are almost, in fact, to my knowledge, invariably always greater than plasma concentrations, and particularly at the end of an elimination process. Urine testing readily detects pharmacologically irrelevant concentrations of substances, and the chemists would actually treat the urine with enzymes to release drugs from conjugates in the urine so they could detect them. And I'm going to speak about that. In 2019, an advisor to the Ohio State Racing Commissioner recommended blood testing only for a number of substances. And we're extending this approach, I'd change the word policy to approach, to identify pharmacologically irrelevant. And I like the word irrelevant. It comes from a French man. Because once you use the word irrelevant and people start using that, they're basically saying it's not relevant. And that's the end of the story. Irrelevant plasma concentrations of substances below which the concentration in plasma should not be reported. To determine an irrelevant plasma concentration, what I've been doing, and Dr. Fenger and I have been doing, is review the regulatory set history of the substance. And if you have identifications in plasma or urine and they're low concentration and they're showing up sporadically and randomly, that's a candidate. You go to the relevant scientific publications and you identify a concentration of the drug, the substance, I hate to use the word drug, the substance in plasma that has no pharmacological, that has the desired pharmacological effect. It's called the effective plasma concentration. You take this figure, you divide it by 500, which is a very conservative figure that has been proposed by Professor Tutain in France, and that gives you an irrelevant plasma concentration. It's 500-fold below what can produce a pharmacological effect. There is essentially no possibility of a pharmacological effect. Then you review the data that's out there and you select an appropriate cutoff or screening limit. And one of the things we've been doing, and we've been lucky in this area, is we've been published them in the refereed scientific literature. So you get a statement out there in the scientific literature that says, don't fool with this below this concentration in plasma, and basically urine identifications are irrelevant. That's the basic message. Horses are very good chemists. I'm going to show you a little trick that your horse can pull that took a little while to work out. Let's see, do I have a pointer? I guess I don't have a pointer. If you look in the upper, okay, if you look at the very upper left-hand corner, you'll see an arrow, you see dextromethorphan, and you see an arrow, and you see a CH3 group there. And what the horse does is it grabs that CH3, takes it off, it demethylates, and you get from dextromethorphan, you go to dextrorphan, you've got a hydroxy group, and then it tacks on a glucuronide molecule, and you can see that on the right. And the green is the molecule that the horse has put on the drug, and the red is the original drug that somehow got into the horse. The concentrations are in the next slide down. If you put a dose of dextromethorphan in a horse, you'd have 400 nanograms per ml in the plasma. The dextrorphan will be, it's so rapidly metabolized, it will be 0.18 nanograms per ml. And that's 2,450-fold less than the dextromethorphan. But the concentrations of the glucuronidated metabolite in the urine, and if you look at the green molecule there, you see all the OH groups, and water molecules interact with OH groups because they look just like water molecules. The horse has converted the molecule into a very water-soluble molecule, and the concentration of the glucuronide in the urine is, if you look down the second last slide, I have in red, 3,613 nanograms per ml is the glucuronide metabolite in the urine, whereas the plasma concentration of the dextrorphan itself is one above it, 0.1 nanograms per ml. The horse, in that particular case, has got a 361,000 times greater concentration of the metabolite in the urine than the parent substance in the blood. Now,
Now, that's the most dramatic example of what a horse can do that I've ever seen, but those are the facts. For most drugs, it's 100 to 200-fold increase in the urinary concentration. For some, it's 1,000. For glucuronidated molecules, it's much greater. So basically, chemists, for most of my 50-year career, have been detecting drugs in substances in blood, in urine. It's time for dietary and environmental substances to move to blood. Like I said, the take-home message is horses are very capable chemists. Molecules that go into the liver can be rapidly glucuronidated and excreted at high concentrations in urine. And we've got one example here where it was 361,000-fold increase, higher concentration in the urine than in the blood. The solution is to avoid I wouldn't say avoid urine testing. It's always going for me to, after I've written my presentation, to go and edit it. I would say you use urine testing, but you don't act on the concentration in urine. With regard to plasma testing, best to define a pharmacologically relevant screening limit, and the screening limit is a defined concentration below which an identification is not called. I'm going to show you a little example of how this business of identifying substances, naturally occurring substances. This is a dietary substance. On Wednesday, a week back Wednesday, February 25th, HIWO announced that the British Horse Racing Authority had identified 2 equine supplements containing a substance called 20-hydroxyicodisone, a type of steroid with anabolic effects. And they noted that under the HIWO rules, it was not FDA approved to use in horses. That's because it's made by plants, and it has no valid veterinary use in the horse, and they noted their usual penalties. And these would be significant penalties for a plant substance apparently found in plants worldwide, including, I believe, spinach. The my story, and Dr. Fenger's story for hydroxyicodisone starts in September, October 2022. Chemists in Sydney, Australia reported this substance in plasma samples from a endurance horse and a few weeks later from a harness horse. It turns out that this substance is produced by plants to inhibit insect molding. Plants out there are making it, and they're making it to discourage insects from living on the plant. The endurance horse situation was a very high profile owner, and I wrote it up for her. But when the second identification came up, the harness stewards went from the Sydney harness racing track to the farm of the trainer and said, "You have an unusual identification." And they went out and grabbed some plants, grabbed this, grabbed that, grabbed the other. They knew that this was an unusual environmental substances, and they identified 20-hydroxyicodisone in plants on the trainer's farm, and there was no penalty imposed on the trainer. Now, the concentrations involved in this matter were 2 nanograms of L in plasma. So I wrote it up in 2020, published in 2024, and basically said this is a plant substance occurring naturally, and we shouldn't call it below 2 nanograms per ml in plasma. I didn't see any identification of that scientific communication in the HISA communication, or indeed in the information that came out from the LGC lab in England. But that's basically what we've been doing. We've been identifying concentrations, irrelevant plasma concentrations of substances that are both a dietary or environmental substances. This story actually starts in Ohio. We had a sequence of gabapentin identifications in Ohio, and we got a Freedom of Information request. And it turns out that a draft letter went from the Ohio Executive Director to the RMTC asking for regulatory guidance on quite a significant number of substances: gabapentin, dextromethorphan that we've just dealt with, hydrochlorothiazide, a diuretic, tramadol, meloxicam, diazepam, methamphetamine, and so forth. This was a draft that was apparently not, to my knowledge, communicated. That it's just a draft, but there were concerns in the regulatory authority about calling positives for these substances. Now, a couple of months later, we have two memoranda from a scientist to the Ohio Race Commission Legal Counsel with recommendations regarding specific substances. The recommendation for gabapentin was 8 nanograms per ml in blood. Don't touch it below that. In blood, meloxicam 1.5 nanograms of serum or plasma. Don't fool with it below that. Methamphetamine 100 picograms per ml, and report whether it's the D-meth or the L-methamphetamine. A pretty conservative cut off, but nevertheless a definite cut off for methamphetamine and one for theophylline. And more interestingly, they had the advice was dextromethorphan only in blood and stay away from conjugates, because those conjugates that you see in urine are also present in the blood, and the chemist could do the hydrolysis reaction and recover the parent substance in the blood. But so the line was for all these substances, only call them in blood, no conjugates. What was not in this particular sequence of communications was a concentration guidance in blood. So basically he said, stay away from urine, stay away from conjugates, only call them if you detect them in blood, but no cutoff level in blood. The one substance that the scientists kept an open mind on was formoterol, which is a clenbuterol-like substance, but all the other substances were listed as blood detections only. As we speak, we're working on defining blood plasma series screening limits for these dietary and environmental substances. The classic example is gabapentin. We proposed a 5 quite a while back, and at about the same time, these communications, which we weren't aware of at the time, proposed 8 in Ohio, and we supported the 8 limit in our publication. And like I said, there was one trainer in Ohio who had a positive, and they pursued it after the 8 nanogram per ml limit was communicated to the commission, and the trainer appealed it based on the fact that the rule had been changed. And we got a freedom of information request, and the Ohio court system, I believe, found against the race commission in favor of the trainer. This was published, this gabapentin story was published in a preliminary format in the Horseman's Journal, and then in the Irish Veterinary Journal as a referee publication. I'm going to discuss the metformin story briefly. It's a widely prescribed human antidiabetic. The dose can be 2 to 3 grams per day. That's a pretty significant dose for a human. And what is really significant about metformin is you don't metabolize it. So if you take 2 grams into your mouth in the morning and you go to the bathroom, you're going to put the whole 2 grams into, flush it down the toilet, and it's going to go into the local environmental system. So basically, it's a widely prescribed substance, it's high dose, it's not metabolized, it's stable in the environment, it's a classic environmental substance. We reviewed the available literature, we identified an effective plasma concentration, and we calculated an relevant plasma concentration of 5 nanograms per ml. And that's a simple scientific thing. And then you look at what the calls are, the reported information in the regulatory literature, what kind of concentrations the chemists are seeing. And if they're coming in below 5, you know they're pharmacologically irrelevant. And we set our limit, we proposed our limit at 5 nanograms per ml with a screening limit. And that was published in March, April of 2024. And I'm pleased to report that there has been some work out of UC Davis, a rather extensive scientific study, which came up with a very similar 4 nanogram per ml caught up at 6 days after administration. Uh, The UC Davis paper also presented some very unexpected long terminal half-lives for metformin, a 25-day terminal half-life for trace levels in plasma and 78 days in urine. And consistent with what I'm saying here today, they noted that urine concentrations were highly variable. So basically, I thought there was a good correlation between what we proposed and what came out of the later UC Davis paper. And we also note that the UC Davis paper did not report how their calculated values related to reported concentrations in environmental samples. Tara? Am I okay rolling along? Yeah. One more, okay. 7-carboxycannabidiol. This one is actually part of the European arrival in America, in North American history. Cannabis plants have been cultivated in the Americas since the European arrival, including, I believe, by George Washington. And since they've been around in North American cultivation for many years, and they're also found wild or feral cannabis plants. They're known as ditchweed. And since 2018, cannabis plants with a THC content of less than 0.3% of dry weight, known as hemp, can be legally grown. And the major cannabinoid in hemp and ditchweed is cannabidiol CBD. When CBD goes into a horse organ, it's rapidly metabolized to 7-carboxy-CBD. The horse is doing some slick chemistry again, and it's found in plasma at 10 to 100 times the concentration of CBD itself. So it's an environmental substance, it's in plants, it's in ditchweed, the horse eats the plant, and basically the concentration in the plasma of the 7-carboxy metabolite is 100 times higher than the CBD itself, and it's also detectable in post-stress urine. A heads up, we got access to some samples where 8 horses were bedded for 4 weeks on a prototype hemp bedding, and they all showed low nanogram per levels of 7-carboxy-CBD. Some showed trace levels of 11-carboxy-CBD, the secondary metabolite of delta THC, the substance of concern in the hemp in the plant. Regulatory detections of 7-carboxy-CBD began in 2019, consistent with the legalization of hemp cultivation in 2018. I'm going to skip to in June 25, we proposed the detection of 7-carboxy-CBD alone in a urine sample should not be pursued as a regulatory matter because it's pharmacologically inactive and because it's a dietary substance in the environment of the horse. More recently, the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Racing and Medication Testing Consortium has recommended that CBD be classified as a 3B substance. And additionally, and these are their words, the SAC recommends the presence of CBD in lieu of its metabolites be required to report an adverse analytical finding in blood or urine. In other words, the 7-carboxy-CBD metabolite that shows up in the plasma not be sufficient sufficient chemical identification to call an active positive. Stay rolling or summarize? I've just been told we're out of time. We had 2 other substances. I just briefly mentioned the Pemeline, and I sent actually these were both called in Pennsylvania, and I sent opinions to Todd Mostler and the traders involved, and the substances were not pursued. Pemeline and benzoylecgonine. We did a screening limit for fentanyl. Adenosine triphosphate is a very interesting story. If anybody wants to know about it, just let me know. And the closing summary is that urine concentrations of substances are almost invariably much greater than plasma concentration. So you can readily detect pharmacologically irrelevant identifications of substances. We are extending this policy to develop irrelevant plasma concentrations, below which concentrations in plasma the substance should not be reported. We're trying to publish, and we've been lucky, we're publishing these in the scientific review. Setting forth the reality that urine infections are generally not related to pharmacological effects. And we've already published a significant number of these IPC, relevant plasma concentration values, in the literature, and we're working on assembling a scientific review in this area for publication. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a
Do we have any
pleasure to
questions?
be here, and thank you for your ongoing support.
Any questions? All right, round of applause for Dr. Tobin.
Thank you very much.
All right, no questions for Dr. Tobin? A little surprised. Okay, well, thank you. Want to, again, let's give this panel a round of applause. Wrapping up the conference with that panel, the races, Dr. Daniels is headed back around to the stage before he gets here. I just wanted to thank, once again, the Arkansas HBPA and Oaklawn for today at the races. Again, going straight to the casino. If you have not been over to the track yet, just find somebody and we can help you walk over. I want to thank a few people, mostly important to me, those who've helped put this conference on. I want to thank Lauren Monet, Audrey Blake, Michelle McShane, Dennis Blake, everybody that's helped put all the staff notes together and keep us moving along. Certainly couldn't do it without any of them. Also want to thank the Oaklawn Resort staff for a great job with all the food, everything that they've done, been very they have been very attentive to us, and certainly we appreciate them very much. So that wraps up the conference. Sorry, one more shout out. I wanted to make sure, because I saved it to the end. This panel was sponsored by the Arizona HBPA and the Ohio's HBPA. So I wanted to do that for Dr. Finger. So Dr. Daniels, come on out, close us out.
That's my staff. I can't help it. I'm sorry. Another conference is in the books. And if I start making lists of people to thank, I will invariably forget somebody and probably restate the ones that Eric's already thought of. But, you know, the folks behind the scenes that put this together are remarkably few. And they get a lot done and they don't get enough appreciation. Between Eric and Lauren, Michelle, Dennis. Did I say Audrey again? Audrey. There's so many people to thank, but a relatively small number of people that actually do the work. And it's my honor to be the president of the National HBPA, and I thank you for allowing me to do so. And I look forward to seeing you all at the races and at our next meeting.
All right, thank you guys. Once again, for the board members, our full board meeting will be tomorrow morning. For those of you that are going to be here, breakfast is actually going to be in that atrium area where we had the cocktail reception tomorrow morning. So have breakfast there, and then we'll see you at the full board meeting. I believe we said 9 o'clock. Whatever it says on the agenda, I'll be there. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming. I really can't say it enough. We obviously couldn't put on the conference without most everyone in this room. So thank you for being here. Thank you for registering, and please let us know if you need anything else. Maybe visit with our buddy Barkley on the way. He's still got some flare strips. Don't go home without them. All right, thank you guys.